Royal Guard shocked by Princess Charlotte's private revelation about Camilla's son. Best story. It was a quiet morning at Buckingham Palace, the kind of morning when the sun softly spilled its golden light across the manicured gardens, and the air carried the faint scent of roses and freshly trimmed grass. For the royal guards, mornings were always busy with routine inspections, ceremonial drills, and careful preparation for the day's events. Yet even with all the routine, something extraordinary was about to unfold, something no guard had ever expected to witness, and something that would leave one of them completely stunned. Among the many guards stationed across the palace grounds, there was a young officer named Thomas. Thomas had joined the Royal Guard only a few months earlier, full of pride and excitement. He had grown up reading stories about the royal family, dreaming of the day he might serve them in person, and now that dream had become reality. Every day, he walked the grand corridors, watched over the royal entrances, and maintained the utmost vigilance. But Thomas had quickly learned that serving the royal family was not only about discipline and ceremony. It was also about discretion, patience, and a silent respect for their private lives. On this particular morning, Thomas had been assigned a light duty near the palace gardens, a place where the royals often took walks, enjoyed a quiet moment away from public attention, or simply breathed in the calm of nature. It was a place where conversations were whispered and laughter rarely echoed, a world separate from the glittering crowds and flashing cameras that waited beyond the palace gates. Thomas had expected a peaceful morning of routine observation, but as he stationed himself near the neatly lined hedges, he noticed Princess Charlotte approaching. Charlotte was only 9 years old at the time, but she carried herself with a grace and confidence far beyond her years. She had a curious spark in her eyes and an air of thoughtfulness that often surprised the adults around her. As she walked, her small hand carefully held her favorite notebook, a place where she jotted down observations, little sketches, or thoughts that were too personal to share with anyone else. It was unusual to see the princess wandering the gardens without an adult, but Thomas knew that sometimes she was allowed moments of privacy to think or play quietly. Charlotte stopped at a familiar spot, a small bench beneath a blossoming cherry tree. The petals drifted gently around her like confetti, and the sunlight made her golden hair shimmer. She sat down, carefully placing her notebook beside her, and looked around with the kind of awareness that could only belong to someone who had grown up in a palace. Thomas, standing at a respectful distance, thought about turning away to give her privacy. But then, unexpectedly, Charlotte spoke, and her voice, soft yet certain, carried through the quiet morning. "Do you want to hear something?" she asked, glancing toward Thomas, though she did not point directly at him. Her tone was innocent, playful even, but there was a seriousness behind her eyes that made Thomas stop in his tracks. He had been trained to maintain his distance and never respond unless spoken to directly. Yet, something in Charlotte's gaze seemed to invite him in, as though she had chosen him specifically as a confidant, someone who could be trusted without question. Hesitating for only a moment, Thomas nodded slightly, signaling his attention without breaking protocol. Charlotte leaned forward, her small fingers fiddling with the corner of her notebook. "It's about someone in the family. Someone people don't really talk about much," she said, her voice lowering to a near whisper. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. Conversations like this were rare, even in the palace, and the mention of secrets within the royal family immediately demanded careful consideration. Yet Charlotte seemed completely unconcerned about the weight of her words. "Camilla's son," she continued, naming the person she had clearly thought about many times. "I know something about him, something that nobody else knows." Her eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Thomas was stunned. He had served in the palace long enough to understand that the royal family's private matters were not for the ears of anyone outside their inner circle. Yet here was Princess Charlotte, a young girl, sharing something highly personal and sensitive with him, a mere guard. Thomas's training kicked in immediately. He maintained a composed expression, keeping his posture straight and his face neutral even as his mind raced. How should he react? Should he respond? Or should he simply listen and absorb the moment without revealing any emotion? Any sign of surprise or judgment could betray the trust Charlotte had so openly placed in him. He decided the best course was silence and careful attention. Charlotte continued, her voice barely audible over the soft rustle of the cherry tree leaves. "I think he feels left out sometimes," she said thoughtfully. "He wants people to notice him, to understand him, but they don't, and it makes him sad." Thomas listened intently, each word painting a vivid picture in his mind. The princess's words were simple, yet they revealed a depth of empathy and understanding that was remarkable for someone her age. Here was a child who could perceive the emotions of others, even those who were often hidden behind public images and royal expectations. For Thomas, the revelation was shocking, not just because of the content, but because of the honesty with which it was delivered. Princess Charlotte spoke as if she had carried this knowledge herself for a long time, weighing its significance and wondering how to process it. And yet she trusted him with it, treating him as a confidant, a silent guardian of her words. He realized then that the role of a royal guard was far more than ceremonial duty. It was about safeguarding moments like this, protecting the personal and delicate truths of the family they served. Charlotte looked at Thomas with an earnest expression, as if searching for confirmation that he understood. "You have to keep this a secret," she added, a serious note in her voice. "It's really important that nobody else knows I told you." Thomas nodded slowly, aware of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. He understood that this was more than a casual conversation. It was a trust, a sacred confidence shared in the quiet of the palace gardens. As he watched Charlotte stand and continue her walk along the winding garden paths, Thomas felt a mixture of awe and respect. Here was a young princess, growing up in one of the most public families in the world, yet capable of observing, analyzing, and understanding human emotions with remarkable clarity. She carried the weight of her family's private realities with a maturity that many adults would find overwhelming. And Thomas, a young guard barely into his career, had been entrusted to witness a glimpse of that inner world. Throughout the day, Thomas found it difficult to focus entirely on his routine duties. The conversation lingered in his mind, replaying with every detail. Charlotte's careful choice of words, her gentle tone, the seriousness behind her youthful eyes. He realized that this was a defining moment, not just in his service as a royal guard, but also in his personal understanding of the royal family. It was a reminder that behind the grandeur, the ceremonies, and the history, there were real people with emotions, vulnerabilities, and connections that were often hidden from public view. Even as the palace bustled with visitors, staff, and officials, Thomas carried Charlotte's words quietly within him. He understood that some moments, however brief, leave a lasting imprint. The trust of a child, the candid revelation of a family secret, and the silent acknowledgement of a young princess's insight, all of it created a memory he would never forget. It was a moment that showed him that life inside the palace, while often governed by tradition and protocol, could also hold private, deeply human stories shared in whispers beneath the blooming cherry trees. By the end of the day, Thomas had returned to his quarters, still reflecting on the morning. He knew that no one could ever know what had been shared, not because it was scandalous, but because it was personal and sacred. It was a reminder of the quiet power of trust, the unexpected depth of a child's observation, and the extraordinary moments that make life in the palace far more complex and fascinating than any visitor could imagine. As he prepared for the next day, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had witnessed a rare and intimate side of the royal family, and he understood that his role was not just to guard their physical safety, but also to protect their secrets, their confidences, and the fragile moments of honesty that might never be seen by the public. And he knew that, in that serene morning under the cherry tree, Princess Charlotte had shared with him something far more valuable than a secret. She had shared a glimpse of her heart. The days after that morning in the palace gardens felt different to Thomas. Even though he continued with his regular duties, standing guard at entrances, patrolling the corridors, and observing the rhythm of palace life, his mind kept returning to Princess Charlotte's words. Her quiet revelation about Camilla's son had stayed with him like a gentle shadow, impossible to ignore. Each time he saw her laugh in the courtyard or spoke politely to staff and visitors, Thomas remembered the earnest look in her eyes and the way she had trusted him with something so private. For Thomas, being a royal guard was always about discipline. Every movement was precise, every expression measured, and every interaction carefully controlled. He had been trained to anticipate situations, to act swiftly in emergencies, and to maintain a steady, calm presence no matter what occurred around him. Yet none of that training had prepared him for a moment like this, a moment where he held knowledge that was both sensitive and deeply personal, a secret shared by a member of the royal family. The weight of it pressed on him in quiet, subtle ways. The guard quickly realized that discretion was now more important than ever. Every glance, every nod, every casual conversation could potentially carry unintended meaning if it hinted at what he had learned. And yet, Charlotte had trusted him without hesitation. Her young mind seemed to understand something Thomas had only begun to learn. That trust was sacred, and that some truths were not meant to be shared widely, even if they felt important. As the days went on, Thomas began to observe Charlotte more carefully. He noticed the little things, the way she would pause near the windows overlooking the gardens, as if lost in thought, how she sometimes fidgeted with the hem of her dress while deep in reflection, and the moments when her gaze seemed to linger on the spaces where her family members interacted, quietly analyzing the dynamics between them. It was clear that Charlotte was not just a child playing in the palace. She was a young observer of human nature, attentive to the subtleties of emotion, behavior, and relationships. Thomas felt a mix of admiration and surprise. Here was a child, barely 9 years old, already able to notice the gaps between people's words and their feelings. He could see how perceptive she was, how she absorbed the nuances of her family's interactions with a sharp yet gentle awareness. It was both inspiring and humbling. He understood that the palace, with all its grandeur and ceremony, could also be a place where a child learned lessons about life, trust, and responsibility far earlier than most children ever would. One afternoon, Thomas was assigned to walk alongside the perimeter of the gardens, while Charlotte played nearby with a small group of attendants. He noticed her stop suddenly near a fountain, her expression thoughtful. Curiosity drew him closer, though he kept a careful distance as always. Charlotte glanced around, ensuring no one else was watching, and then began speaking softly to herself, almost as if she were thinking out loud. "I don't think anyone really understands him," she said, her eyes following a bird perched on the fountain edge. "He tries so hard to be noticed, but it doesn't work the way he wants. And I just wish I could help." Her voice was quiet, almost inaudible, but Thomas could hear every word. The sincerity in her tone struck him deeply. This wasn't a passing observation or a childish complaint, it was a genuine expression of empathy. Charlotte was reflecting on someone else's feelings, someone who often went unseen or misunderstood, and she was trying to find a way to make a difference. Thomas felt a sudden wave of responsibility wash over him. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, to maintain their security and privacy, but now he realized that part of his role included witnessing moments like this. These were glimpses into the inner lives of people who, despite their status and public attention, were still human, still vulnerable, still seeking understanding. And Charlotte, in her innocence and insight, was navigating these emotions with a maturity far beyond her years. That evening, Thomas returned to his quarters, his mind full of reflections. He considered how unusual it was for a child to show such awareness, to comprehend that someone could feel overlooked or lonely despite being part of a prominent family. And yet, Charlotte had not only recognized it, she had acknowledged it openly, with a desire to help. It reminded Thomas that empathy, even in its simplest form, could be one of the most powerful traits a person could have. The next morning brought a new kind of challenge. Thomas had been assigned to the palace's main hall during a small gathering of staff and minor royals. As he stood at his post, his attention was drawn to Charlotte, who had slipped away from the crowd for a few quiet moments. She approached him, notebook in hand, her eyes filled with a mixture of seriousness and curiosity. "I was thinking about what I said the other day," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was near. "About him, Camilla's son. I want to understand him better. But I don't know how." Her voice carried a small, almost hesitant quality, as though she were seeking guidance from someone she trusted, even though he was only a guard. Thomas felt a surge of admiration. The princess's words revealed a desire not just to know, but to act thoughtfully and kindly. He could sense that this was not about gossip or curiosity, it was about compassion. In that moment, he realized that he was witnessing something rare. The inner moral development of a young person learning to navigate complex social dynamics within her own family. He responded carefully, his voice low and respectful. Sometimes understanding comes from listening, Princess Charlotte, paying attention to how he feels, noticing what he likes, and giving him space to be himself. Those things matter more than anything else. Charlotte's eyes brightened at his words. She nodded thoughtfully, as if processing every syllable and storing it away for later reflection. Over the next few days, Thomas observed subtle changes in Charlotte's behavior. She seemed more reflective, occasionally retreating to quiet corners to jot notes in her notebook or watch her family members interact. Yet she also appeared more determined, carrying herself with a quiet confidence and a sense of purpose. Thomas realized that her private reflection was shaping her understanding of relationships, empathy, and discretion, lessons that even many adults struggled to learn. Thomas also noticed the challenge that came with carrying a secret. He was acutely aware that Charlotte's revelation was not something to share with anyone. Even within the walls of the palace, discretion was a delicate art, and the trust Charlotte had placed in him was something he could never take lightly. Every conversation, every gesture, and every observation required careful attention. He knew that the smallest slip could betray her confidence, and that realization added a weight to his duties that he had not experienced before. One evening, as the palace grew quiet and the last of the staff left their posts, Thomas found himself walking through the gardens once more. The sky was painted with soft pink and orange hues, the kind of sky that made the palace seem almost magical. Charlotte appeared nearby, standing beneath the cherry tree where their first conversation had taken place. She looked up at the fading light, lost in thought. Thomas remained at a respectful distance, observing her quietly. He could see the complexity in her young mind, the balance between childhood innocence and the early awareness of family dynamics. Charlotte seemed to understand that life, even within the palace, was filled with moments that required careful thought, patience, and empathy. And he realized that his role as a guard was not just about protecting her physically. It was about honoring her trust, witnessing her growth, and ensuring that her private moments remained private. As Thomas watched her, he felt a deep sense of responsibility and pride. The trust that Charlotte had placed in him was not just a personal honor. It was a reminder of the delicate nature of human connections, of the importance of listening, understanding, and safeguarding the feelings of others. He knew that the lessons she was learning would stay with her for a lifetime, shaping her character, her empathy, and her understanding of the world around her. By the time night fell over Buckingham Palace, Thomas returned to his quarters with a quiet sense of fulfillment. The palace, with all its history and grandeur, had revealed to him a truth far more profound than any ceremonial protocol or public spectacle. Life inside these walls was rich with private moments, human connections, and the growth of young minds learning to navigate complexity, trust, and compassion. And in that quiet journey, Princess Charlotte had shown him the extraordinary power of honesty, empathy, and confidence, qualities that would leave a lasting impression on anyone fortunate enough to witness them. As the days passed, Buckingham Palace seemed to carry on with its usual rhythm, yet for Thomas, everything felt different. The echo of Princess Charlotte's words still lingered in his mind, and he couldn't help but notice the subtle ways she processed what she had revealed. Every gesture, every glance, and every small action she took seemed layered with thought and intention. It was as if she were quietly navigating the world with a new understanding, one that few others could grasp, and Thomas realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Charlotte had begun to observe her family more closely, not with judgment, but with a genuine curiosity. She would watch her parents, older siblings, and extended family members, noticing the ways they interacted, the pauses in conversation, the moments of hesitation, and the subtle signs of emotion that often went unnoticed by those around them. It was remarkable to see a child so young able to read these cues, and Thomas, ever vigilant, found himself learning from her perspective. One afternoon, Thomas was stationed near the central courtyard when he noticed Charlotte lingering near a small fountain. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes following the water as it danced over the edges of the basin. A few attendants were nearby, yet they were busy with their duties and paid little attention to her. Thomas, standing at a respectful distance, observed silently. There was a stillness in her posture, a quiet reflection that seemed almost adult in its depth. "I wonder why he feels the way he does," Charlotte muttered softly, almost to herself. Thomas could hear her voice even from several steps away, and it struck him how sincere her words were. She wasn't speaking about an imaginary scenario or a storybook character. She was talking about someone she had seen struggle, someone whose feelings were real and deserving of empathy. The care in her tone was astonishing for a child, and Thomas felt a deep respect for her ability to perceive and acknowledge the emotions of others. Thomas remembered the first time she had confided in him under the cherry tree. The memory was vivid, the sunlight, the petals drifting in the air, and the seriousness in her young eyes. That moment had left a lasting impression on him, and now, observing her again, he could see that Charlotte had not forgotten the responsibility that came with understanding. She was thinking, analyzing, and seeking solutions in her own thoughtful way. Over the next few days, Thomas noticed that Charlotte was increasingly deliberate in her interactions. She would ask questions that seemed simple on the surface, but carried depth in their intent. "Do you think he likes being alone sometimes?" she would ask. "Or how do I make him feel included without drawing too much attention?" These questions, while innocent in tone, revealed a keen insight into human relationships. Charlotte was learning to navigate complexity, balancing sensitivity with action, and Thomas realized that this was a rare skill developing before his eyes. For Thomas, this was both inspiring and humbling. He had seen many adults struggle with empathy, misunderstanding the needs of others or failing to recognize emotions that were right in front of them. Yet here was a young princess, navigating the world with care and insight, determined to act thoughtfully and respectfully. He understood that these lessons were shaping her character in profound ways, preparing her not only for her future role within the royal family, but also for the kind of person she would become: compassionate, observant, and wise beyond her years. One evening, Thomas found himself walking through the palace corridors when he heard Charlotte speaking softly to an older staff member. He couldn't make out all the words, but he caught fragments of a conversation about kindness, attention, and understanding. He realized that Charlotte was beginning to take initiative in small ways, attempting to connect with those around her on a personal level. Her empathy was becoming action, not just observation. It was remarkable to witness, and Thomas felt privileged to see these moments that would likely remain unseen by the public. The next morning, Thomas was assigned to patrol near the West Wing, where Charlotte often spent time studying or sketching in her notebook. He noticed her seated by a window, gazing out at the gardens with a reflective expression. Her notebook lay open in front of her, and she was writing carefully, each word deliberate. Thomas could see her small hand move with purpose, and he understood that these notes were not mere scribbles. They were reflections, observations, and perhaps even plans for how to better understand and help those around her. As he watched, Charlotte looked up and caught his eye. She smiled briefly, a small, knowing smile that conveyed both confidence and trust. Thomas felt a warmth in his chest at that simple gesture. The trust she had placed in him under the cherry tree had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. He knew that this connection, built on respect and discretion, was unique, and it reinforced the importance of his role as a guard, not just to protect physically, but to honor and safeguard the private moments of those he served. Thomas also began to notice the subtle ways in which Charlotte's presence affected others. Staff members and attendants seemed to respond to her with increased attentiveness, aware of her quiet authority and thoughtful nature. Even her parents, when in private moments, would glance at her with a mix of affection and admiration, acknowledging the maturity and awareness that was evident in her behavior. It was clear that Charlotte's observations and reflections were shaping not only her understanding of relationships, but also influencing those around her in gentle, meaningful ways. One afternoon, Thomas was walking near the garden when he overheard Charlotte speaking softly to herself again. "I don't want him to feel invisible," she said. Her voice was tender, almost as if she were reassuring herself as much as anyone else. Thomas realized that this desire to protect and support was not fleeting. It was becoming a guiding principle in her young life. She was learning that caring for others required attention, patience, and thoughtful action, and he marveled at her dedication to understanding someone else's feelings with such sincerity. Throughout these days, Thomas also reflected on his own responsibilities. He had always understood the importance of vigilance, discipline, and duty, but now he recognized a deeper layer of service. Protecting the royal family was not only about security, It was about trust, confidentiality, and witnessing moments that could never be shared. He felt a profound respect for Charlotte's ability to navigate her emotions and her empathy, and he understood that his role included being a silent observer and a protector of these precious, private moments. Even during ceremonial events, Thomas found himself more aware of Charlotte's subtle expressions and interactions. While outwardly polite and engaged, she often appeared reflective, analyzing situations and quietly observing the people around her. Her young mind seemed to process layers of emotion and intention that others might miss entirely. Thomas understood that these moments were shaping her character, giving her a sense of discernment and understanding that would serve her well in the years to come. One evening, as the palace grew quiet and shadows lengthened across the gardens, Thomas saw Charlotte sitting once more beneath the cherry tree. The petals drifted gently around her, a soft reminder of the morning when she had first confided in him. She looked up at the fading light, her expression thoughtful and serene. Thomas approached quietly, maintaining the distance that protocol demanded, and simply observed. There was a sense of peace in the moment, a silent acknowledgement of trust and understanding between them. Thomas realized then that he had been witness to a rare and profound journey. Charlotte's reflections, observations, and private musings were more than the curiosity of a child. They were the early formation of empathy, insight, and moral understanding. She was learning, in her own way, how to navigate the complexities of family, loyalty, and human emotion, and he had the privilege of seeing it unfold firsthand. As he walked back to his quarters that night, Thomas felt a deep sense of responsibility and awe. He understood that the palace, with all its grandeur and history, held not just public spectacle, but also intimate, human moments that shaped the people within it. Charlotte's quiet journey of understanding and empathy had revealed to him the richness of life behind the palace walls, a life filled with observation, reflection, and the growth of character. He knew that these experiences, though unseen by the public, were profoundly significant. Charlotte's ability to notice, understand, and care for someone else's feelings was extraordinary, and it left a lasting impression on him. He understood that empathy, discretion, and trust were as crucial as ceremonial precision, or the guarding of doors and corridors. And he realized that this young princess, so small yet so perceptive, was learning lessons that would guide her throughout her life, shaping her into someone capable of kindness, understanding, and quiet strength. The following weeks at Buckingham Palace brought a mixture of routine and quiet reflection for Thomas. Though the palace continued to operate with the same precision as ever, servants moving through the halls with practiced efficiency, royals attending their schedules with grace, and guards maintaining unwavering vigilance, Thomas felt a subtle shift in his own awareness. The private moments he had shared with Princess Charlotte and the trust she had placed in him had changed the way he saw his duties. Guarding the royal family was no longer just about discipline and ceremony. It was also about understanding, empathy, and responsibility for the intimate lives of those he served. Thomas often found himself replaying conversations and quiet observations in his mind, carefully analyzing each moment. He thought about how Charlotte had shared her feelings about Camilla's son, how she had expressed concern, and how she had been so thoughtful in considering his feelings without ever being judgmental. Her words had revealed a depth of emotional intelligence that was rare for someone of her age. And now, Thomas carried that insight with him everywhere he went, aware that even the smallest gestures and expressions in the palace could carry meaning beyond the obvious. One quiet afternoon, Thomas was stationed near the West Wing Gardens when he noticed Charlotte sitting alone on a low bench beneath the cherry tree. The petals had begun to fall more thickly now, carried by a soft breeze, creating a delicate carpet of pink on the ground. Charlotte's notebook was open in her lap, and her small hand moved carefully as she wrote. From the distance, Thomas could see her lips move slightly as if she were speaking her thoughts to herself. He remembered the first morning under this very tree, when she had confided in him about her observations of Camilla's son. Now she seemed even more reflective, almost as if she were processing what she had learned and thinking of ways to act kindly and thoughtfully in her world. Thomas felt a deep respect for her determination to understand, to connect, and to approach her family with empathy. This was not a fleeting curiosity. It was a deliberate, ongoing effort to grow in awareness and compassion. As Thomas quietly observed, he realized how much Charlotte had changed in the weeks since their first conversation. She moved with a calm confidence, interacting with her attendants and family members in ways that were both gentle and intentional. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed to notice things others overlooked. The way someone hesitated before speaking, the small frown that betrayed unspoken emotions, or the fleeting moments of doubt behind a polite smile. It was remarkable to see a child cultivate such awareness, and Thomas understood that these moments of observation and reflection were shaping her character in profound ways. That evening, Thomas found himself sitting quietly in the guardroom, reflecting on his own role in these private moments. He realized that being a royal guard went beyond standing at attention or performing ceremonial duties. It also meant protecting the sanctity of the personal and private moments he witnessed, maintaining discretion no matter how tempting it might be to share or discuss them. He thought about the delicate balance of trust and responsibility that Charlotte had placed upon him, and he understood that this trust was sacred. The young princess had chosen him as a confidant, and it was his duty to honor that choice, silently and faithfully. Over the next few days, Thomas noticed Charlotte engaging with her family in ways that demonstrated subtle but meaningful thoughtfulness. She would offer a quiet word of encouragement to a sibling, smile at someone who seemed unsure of themselves, or simply listen attentively when someone shared a concern. These were not grand gestures, nor were they performed for recognition. They were small, deliberate acts of kindness, rooted in understanding and empathy. Thomas watched with admiration as Charlotte navigated these interactions, realizing that her early lessons in observation and emotional awareness were already shaping her into a person of quiet influence and wisdom. One afternoon, Thomas observed a moment that would stay with him for years. Charlotte was walking near a small fountain where Camilla's son had stopped to admire the water. He seemed hesitant, almost unsure of how to act in the presence of others. Charlotte approached him slowly, her expression gentle and patient. She spoke softly, not drawing attention to him, but in a way that acknowledged his presence and feelings. Thomas could not hear all of their words, but he saw the change in the boy's posture, the subtle relaxing of his shoulders, the faint smile that broke across his face. Charlotte had reached out, with understanding and care, and had made a difference without anyone else even noticing. Thomas reflected on that moment long after it had passed. He realized that Charlotte's growth was not just about understanding others. It was also about learning to act with discretion, compassion, and wisdom. She was discovering the power of empathy in action, and Thomas understood that these lessons, learned so young, would stay with her for life. He felt honored to witness this process, knowing that he was part of a rare and delicate chapter in her development. The guard also became more introspective about his own role. He thought about the importance of silence, of maintaining confidentiality, and of recognizing the value of private moments. He knew that many people outside the palace would never understand the complexity of life within its walls, and he appreciated the rare glimpses he was allowed to see. Charlotte's trust had given him insight not only into her character, but also into the hidden layers of human relationships, responsibility, and care. One evening, Thomas walked through the dimly lit corridors of the palace, his footsteps echoing softly. He paused near the study where Charlotte often spent her afternoons. Through the window, he saw her sitting at a desk, her notebook open, her face thoughtful as she wrote quietly. The sight reminded him of the first morning under the cherry tree, and he marveled at how much she had grown in understanding, empathy, and poise in such a short time. Thomas realized that the quiet moments of observation, reflection, and action he had witnessed were shaping Charlotte's character in ways that would remain private yet profoundly meaningful. He understood that these were the lessons that mattered most: how to care for others, how to act with discretion, and how to approach the world with a thoughtful heart. And he felt a renewed sense of pride in his own role, recognizing that his duties extended beyond protection to include witnessing, respecting, and preserving these intimate moments. As nights grew longer and the palace settled into quiet, Thomas often found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned from Charlotte. He thought about her careful observations, her empathy, and her growing understanding of how to navigate human emotions with kindness and discretion. He realized that, in many ways, He had learned from her as much as she had shared with him. Her insight, even at such a young age, was a reminder that wisdom and compassion can emerge in unexpected ways, and that the quiet power of observation and understanding can have a profound impact. One evening, as he walked past the gardens under a sky full of stars, Thomas saw Charlotte standing beneath the cherry tree once more. She looked calm, her notebook tucked under her arm, as if she had finished another day of reflection and quiet study. The petals drifted around her like soft snow, creating a serene and magical scene. Thomas stood silently, watching her with a sense of awe and respect. In that moment, he felt the full weight of the trust she had placed in him, and he understood that his role was not only to protect the royal family, but also to honor the private growth, insight, and empathy he was privileged to witness. He knew that these moments were fleeting, that they could not be shared or discussed, yet they were invaluable. They revealed a side of the royal family that few would ever see, a side full of human emotion, thoughtful reflection, and quiet moral development. Thomas felt grateful to be part of this hidden world, understanding that even in the midst of ceremony, duty, and history, there existed a realm of personal growth, trust, and care that shaped the people he served. As he prepared to retire for the night, Thomas reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. Princess Charlotte had shown him that empathy, observation, and careful action were as important as discipline, vigilance, and protocol. She had demonstrated the power of trust, the value of quiet reflection, and the significance of small, thoughtful gestures. And he realized that his role, though often unseen and silent, was essential in preserving these delicate private moments. The palace may have been a place of grandeur and tradition, but it was also a place where human emotions, understanding, and growth quietly flourished. And Thomas knew that he had been privileged to witness a rare and beautiful part of that life, the journey of a young princess learning to navigate her world with empathy, insight, and thoughtful action. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Buckingham Palace continued its steady rhythm of tradition, ceremony, and daily routine. For most observers, life within the palace walls seemed grand and almost untouchable, defined by public appearances, official events, and the strict order of protocols. Yet Thomas, the young guard, knew the palace held another kind of life, a quiet, private life where small gestures, thoughtful observations, and deeply personal moments carried weight far beyond public recognition. It was in this hidden world that Princess Charlotte continued to grow, learn, and quietly shape the people around her. Thomas had become increasingly aware of the subtle ways in which Charlotte's presence influenced the palace. Her empathy, thoughtfulness, and attentiveness did not always show in grand gestures. Instead, they appeared in the little things, a smile offered to someone who felt unnoticed, a gentle word of encouragement to someone struggling, or simply her patient listening when someone spoke. These actions were never meant for praise or recognition. They were the natural expressions of a child learning the importance of compassion and human connection. Thomas often found himself quietly observing these moments, understanding that they were shaping Charlotte's character in ways both profound and lasting. One crisp morning, Thomas was stationed near the gardens when he noticed Charlotte walking with a small group of attendants and her younger sibling. She stopped near a fountain where Camilla's son was quietly seated, sketching the rippling water with a pencil. Charlotte approached him calmly, her expression gentle and inviting, offering no judgment, no intrusion, only presence. The boy looked up at her, uncertain at first, then relaxed as she spoke softly, encouraging him in his art and conversation. Thomas watched this interaction with quiet admiration. It was a small moment, almost invisible in the broader life of the palace, yet it reflected the depth of Charlotte's understanding, her empathy, and her growing maturity. Thomas reflected on the importance of these moments. While much of the palace was concerned with appearances, ceremonies, and protocols, these private interactions revealed something deeper: human connection. He realized that Charlotte's early lessons in empathy and observation were not only shaping her own character, but also influencing those around her. Even small acts of kindness and understanding could have a ripple effect, quietly changing the way others felt, interacted, and saw themselves. In witnessing this, Thomas understood the rare privilege and responsibility he held as a guard, to protect and preserve these moments, to ensure that the trust placed in him remained unbroken. Over time, Thomas noticed that Charlotte's behavior reflected both thoughtfulness and discretion. She never sought attention for her kindness, never boasted about her observations, and rarely discussed her reflections aloud. It was clear that she understood the importance of privacy and confidentiality, even in her interactions with family and close attendants. Thomas admired this restraint, recognizing that it mirrored his own role in the palace, where observation, discretion, and silent respect were crucial. Together, in different ways, both the guard and the princess navigated the delicate balance of trust, understanding, and responsibility. As the seasons changed, Thomas observed Charlotte engaging in moments of quiet leadership. She would gently guide her siblings or attendants, helping them understand emotions, encouraging patience, and modeling respectful behavior. It was not authoritative leadership in the formal sense. It was the quiet influence of someone who understood the importance of empathy, observation, and thoughtful action. Thomas marveled at her ability to navigate these small but meaningful interactions, recognizing that these lessons would continue to shape her into a compassionate, perceptive, and wise individual as she grew older. One afternoon, Thomas found himself reflecting on the weight of the trust Charlotte had placed in him months earlier. He remembered that first morning beneath the cherry tree, when she had confided in him about Camilla's son and the feelings of isolation and longing she had observed. That moment had changed his perception of his duties forever. He realized that being a guard was not just about protection and vigilance. It was about witnessing human experiences, understanding private struggles, and preserving the sanctity of trust. These lessons were ongoing, unfolding with each observation of Charlotte's thoughtful actions, each reflection she recorded in her notebook, and each interaction she carefully navigated. In one particularly quiet evening, Thomas observed Charlotte sitting alone in the garden, her notebook open, her expression contemplative. The setting sun bathed the palace in a warm, golden light, and petals from the cherry trees drifted lazily through the air. Charlotte wrote with careful attention, pausing occasionally to reflect, to observe, or to consider how her words might translate into action. Thomas recognized that this was not just a child playing or recording thoughts. It was a young person learning to understand, process, and act with thoughtfulness and integrity. The discipline of observation, reflection, and empathy was clearly taking root in her character. Thomas also noticed the broader effect of Charlotte's growth. Staff and attendants began to respond to her presence with increased attentiveness and respect, not because of her position or title, but because of the calm, thoughtful way she interacted with others. Her quiet confidence and empathy created a subtle atmosphere of understanding and kindness, influencing those around her to act with consideration and care. Even moments that seemed ordinary, like sharing a smile, offering guidance, or simply listening, carried a quiet weight that enriched the environment of the palace. Over time, Thomas understood that the story of Charlotte and her private insights was more than a tale of childhood observation. It was a lesson in human connection, empathy, and the value of discretion. In witnessing her growth, he learned the importance of patience, reflection, and quiet influence. The young princess had taught him, without words, that observing, understanding, and acting thoughtfully could have a profound effect, not only on individuals, but on the environment around them. And he, in turn, had become a silent guardian of these lessons, ensuring that trust remained unbroken and private moments remained protected. One evening, as Thomas walked through the palace corridors, he reflected on how extraordinary Charlotte's development had been. She had transformed private observations into a quiet form of leadership, navigating relationships with empathy, consideration, and awareness beyond her years. He realized that the lessons she was learning about kindness, observation, trust, and discretion were shaping her into a person of remarkable character. And in observing her journey, he felt a deep sense of pride, respect, and gratitude. As the days moved forward, Thomas saw Charlotte interacting with her family with a balance of warmth, understanding, and thoughtful discretion. She continued to observe quietly, offer gentle support, and act with kindness in ways that were meaningful yet subtle. These moments were fleeting, often unnoticed by the larger world, yet they carried tremendous weight in shaping the people she touched. Thomas recognized that this quiet, deliberate approach to understanding and supporting others was a rare gift, one that would influence her character for a lifetime. By the time night fell over Buckingham Palace, Thomas reflected on his journey alongside Charlotte. He thought about the first morning under the cherry tree, the weeks of quiet observation, and the countless moments of reflection and growth he had witnessed. He understood that life inside the palace was not defined solely by ceremony, tradition, or public appearances, but by these intimate, private experiences that shaped the character of its residents. Charlotte had grown quietly yet powerfully, learning lessons in empathy, discretion, and thoughtfulness that would stay with her for life. Thomas also realized that the role of a royal guard was about more than discipline or vigilance. It was about witnessing these moments with respect, preserving the trust placed in him, and understanding the profound human experiences hidden behind the grandeur of the palace. The lessons he had learned from Charlotte, about empathy, observation, and responsibility, would remain with him for the rest of his career and beyond. In the final weeks of that season, Thomas often saw Charlotte under the cherry tree, notebook in hand, reflecting, observing, and quietly processing the world around her. Her presence remained calm, thoughtful, and inspiring. Each interaction, no matter how small, was deliberate, and each action carried the lessons she had been learning. Thomas understood that he had witnessed the formation of character, the development of empathy, and the cultivation of discretion in a young princess, who would grow to carry these qualities with grace throughout her life. And as the palace settled into silence each night, Thomas knew that these private moments, the quiet observations, the thoughtful reflections, and the gentle acts of understanding, were among the most important aspects of life inside Buckingham Palace. They were reminders that behind every grand ceremony, every public appearance, and every historic tradition, there existed a hidden world of human connection, learning, and growth. Charlotte had revealed this world to him, and he had honored it with care, discretion, and respect. Through all of this, Thomas realized something fundamental. Life in the palace was not defined solely by history, tradition, or protocol. It was defined by the quiet, private moments where understanding, empathy, and trust could flourish. Princess Charlotte had shown him that even a child could perceive, learn, and influence the world in profound ways. And he, in turn, had become a guardian not just of the palace and its people, but of the trust, growth, and humanity that quietly shaped the lives of everyone within its walls.